Chevre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis v'ruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Shabbos Pashas Vaetchanun, Shabbos Chamisha B'Av, Shabbos Nachamu, and we're going to speak Be'ez Hashem Yisborach, a thought of the week. And we're in the Shiva, the end of the Shiva for Reb Yoel, Harav Agoyin, Rav Chosid, my Mashpia. So we're going to speak a thought which is connected to Reb Yoel. Before we get to the thought, as usual, we'll start with a posik, and this is posik Vav in Kapitel Kuf Yutes. Oz loy evoish babiti el kol mitzisecho. We say, then I shall not be ashamed when I gaze upon all of your commandments. So we can connect this to Reb Yoel, and as a chassid from the Rebbe. If you want to talk about the Rebbe, you want to be able to say what the Rebbe's view is on an issue, or b'chlal the Rebbe's hashkafa, it has to be ba'biti el kol mitzisecha. You have to have the total Rebbe. You can't just pick the sichas of Tavshin Yud to Tavshin Chav, or Tavshin Lam to Tavshin Mem, or Nun and Aleph. Yeah, it's all Teres Emes, it's all true. But in order to get to be Taka, a real Talmud, like Reb Yoel, it has to be Ba'biti El Kol Mitzvah. Rabbi Leibel Shapiro started a series of voice notes about Reb Yoel, and he said that the first Tanacha that Reb Yoel wrote was on the stories that the Rebbe said right after Yud Shvat, during the Shiva of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And Reb Yoel wasn't even there. And somehow, he wrote Tanakh, he found out what the Rebbe had said. So the point is that Reb Yoel came a couple of days later, landed from the boat from Eretz Yisrael, and still he went back from the beginning. From the beginning of when the Rebbe is Nesiderenu, Reb Yoel absorbed and took it all in. Ba'abiti el kol mitzvah. In this week's parsha, there's a tremendous connection, and it's about teachers. And Reb Yoel was the teacher of all teachers. What does the pasuk say? ושננתם לבניך. You should teach Torah to your sons. And as we all know what Rashi says, ושננתם, first he says Loshen chidud, that means sharpness. And he says, שיהיו מחודדים בפיך, and we're talking about the teacher, that the word should be sharp. If someone asks you a question, they shouldn't be hesitating, go or have unclarity. And the point over here is, as we'll see from the Rebbe Sikha and Chelik Tes, that's how you have to teach your students, that by them it should also be in such a way. And we say Levanecha to your sons, and the Rebbe brings, and Rashi brings a couple of psukim on that to prove that your children are your sons. And then he finishes off with the words that it says in Malachim, what Elisha said after Eliyahu went up to the heaven, that Rashi says, just like the Talmidim are called Banim, Kacha Rav Koroi Ov, so too the teacher is called a father, Shenemar, Ovi Rechav Yisrael, the Goymer. We see over there that Elisha calls Eliyahu Ovi. So I'm going to say over something which the Rebbe says, Mekuti Sichas Chelik Tes, Vaetchanun, page 46 to 48. I highly recommend you to look it up in its original. And it's a long Rashi Sikha. But I'm just getting to the punchline and how it's negayed to teachers. So first of all, what are we talking about over here? We're talking about one of the most dramatic episodes that happens in the Torah. As the pasuk says that Eliyahu is walking along with Elisha, and they see, Elisha also saw the Rechavesh and the Susayesh. He saw a chariot of fire and he saw horses of fire. Anyways, Vayal Eliyahu b'sayir hashamoyim. And Eliyahu ascends alive to the heavens in a whirlwind. And Elisha cries out, Elisha royev u'metzayek, Ovi, Rechav Yisrael. Father, the Israel's chariot and horseman and rider. V'goymer is the words of Pharashav. That Eliyahu is also the rider, the driver. So first of all, anybody who's been around has heard many sermons. Dorshe Dashonim. Whenever some great leader passes away, they paraphrase. They use the words of Elisha and they go, Ovi, Ovi, Rechev Yisrael. They cry out. And Bepashtus, what does it mean, Rechev Yisrael? You could say that he's the pilot of Klal Yisrael. A Manig Ader, a Nasi Ader. He's the pilot of the generation. He's the chariot. He's the vehicle that is driving and leading us to wherever we have to go. And as the Rebbe brings down the Sikha, also the Pashta Pshat is that Eliyahu gave the koyach to the Yidden, and that's what it means, Rechev Yisrael. And Elisha is saying that we have the power to be victorious in all our wars. Because the chariot was a weapon of those times, like a tank, a war weapon. So by saying Rechev Yisrael, Elisha was saying that Eliyahu was the one who led the Yidden through victories, and now he gave us that power. We'll also have that power to be victorious in our wars and battles against the enemies. So B'Pashtus, when you learn the Pasuk, and we say, Ovi, Ovi, Rechev Yisrael, we're talking about a leader, the leader. But from this Rashi comes out, no. There's a message over here in the words, Ovi, Ovi, Rechev Yisrael, that applies to every single teacher, every single instructor, every single influencer. The teacher is Ovi, Ovi. It's applying to all teachers. And every teacher is a Rechev Yisrael. How do we understand what it means that the teacher is a Rechev Yisrael? And the Rebbe asks in the Sikh over there, why does he say V'goymer? Why does Rashi say V'goymer and he doesn't bring down the word Ufroshav and the rider and the driver? So the Rebbe explains that just like in physical wars, there's mental wars, there's intellectual wars. So what's a good teacher? And by the way, this is connected. And this is what it means, that you're like a father. The teacher's like a father. He has to give himself. It's hard work. And it has to be in a way, ושננתם, that the student becomes sharp and clear and gruntig and solid and thorough without any wishy-washy. How do you accomplish that? So the first thing is Rechev. What does it mean, Rechev? That you give him the tank, you give him the chariot? That means you give him the principles. You give him the rules. You give him the keys. So let's say we're talking about a mashpi in Chassidus. And you learn a maimer. And the word comes up. So what does mean? It's very nice. You learn one maimer, another maimer, but you need a good teacher who's going to give you certain principles that when you say the word what does the word mean? Light, physical light. Or if we say Atzilus is higher, does it mean like if I take a rocket ship, I'll go higher and there I'll find Atzilus? And so on and so forth. So what does it mean, Rechev? Rechev means like a car, like a chariot. This is, you gave him the tool, the vehicle, that he's going to be able to navigate the minefield, the battlefield, in the war of ideas and logic. The Rebbe says you can have a svara, you have one logic, one argument that goes one way. But then someone might ask you a question. Then you have a contradiction. You know, like they say, on the one hand, but on the other hand, but on the other hand, and it can go back and forth. I once read a children's book and it started, of something like, I had a mind. The trouble was, I couldn't make it up. I couldn't make up what to do. Should I have a peanut butter sandwich or should I have a tuna fish sandwich? On the one hand, on the other hand. So every single person with a brain is going to be on his journey through a minefield of intellect. The teacher gives the student the principles and the keys and the foundations that apply all over. And with the help of those principles and those keys, He'll be able to navigate through any minefield and come to the right conclusions. And that's what it means, Rechav Yisrael. You have to be the one. Every single teacher has to teach and understand it's not only about this thesis. It's not only about this mimer. You have to open it up for him in a way that it becomes clear and solid that for the future he has these principles. But then sometimes it's not only enough to give him the principles, it's not only enough to give him the vehicle, but sometimes he doesn't know how to drive. He's a lower level student. So, sometimes dailach kim b'remiza, sometimes you need more than a miza, sometimes you really have to work hard. So, ufroshav means that it's not enough that you have to give him the vehicle, it's not enough that you have to give him the principles, it's not enough that you have to give him the keys, you have to actually get into the driver's seat and take him through, step by step. You might go here, and this question might come up, and then you have to do this. So it's another whole level of being mitzamtzim, the principles. It's like, for example, I'm just giving you an example. We have Klolei Chinuch V'Adracha. That's sefer. It's a unique sefer. There's no other sefer like that in all of Chassidus Chabad. But I always say that it's called Klolei HaChinuch V'Adracha. It's the principles. Somebody has to now write another book and show how it applies in all the details. Because not everyone possibly got it right. You understand? This reminds me of a joke. I was once talking to a bacher, and the bacher says, Rabbi Winner, I'm having a problem. I read this book, Einstein for Dummies, and I don't get it. So then we came to the conclusion, we have to make another series, Einstein for Dummies, for Dummies. So this is a humorous point, but the word is, there's what's called the dumbing down of society. We're not ridiculing. We're saying, we have to make it more accessible and more accessible and more accessible. Like it says in the Gemara about the one who taught something 400 times so that it should be understood. So that's the meaning of a Ufroshav. Not only Rechav Yisrael, but sometimes it has to be a Ufroshav. That means you have to actually go into the driver's seat and go through all the navigation and all the minefield and show what sort of dilemmas could come up, what sort of contradictions could come up, what sort of intellectual crises can come up, and how to come out safely and come to the right conclusions. So now, let's go back to Reb Yoel and the lessons we can take. And what does it mean that Reb Yoel was the teacher of all teachers? So, first of all, if we talk about Chassidim, I don't want to get into it now, all the names of all the people that he influenced, every single mashpia, every single chassid, without fail, was influenced and will be continued to be influenced through Reb Yoel. And this was all discussed already by many people throughout this whole week. Kula libed Reb Yoel. So I'm going to talk more, the teacher of all teachers, in how he taught. And like I spoke last week, if you saw my video from last week, how I described a shir of Reb Yoel. So now I'm going to talk about So, first of all, somebody told me this week something, and I like the way he said it, that when Reb Yoel used to give a shir, and when he would be at the part of the shir where he's asking a question, the question was so gruntig that the Talmud thought to himself, there's no way that there could be an answer to this question. And then when Reb Yoel gave the answer, it was so gewaldig that we couldn't imagine how there could be a question in the first place. And I thought that's very, very true. Because that's the way Reb Yoel was. When we say the Dveri Teireh Chadudim Meficha, everything was so clear. So clear, 100%. And when he was going in one direction, it was 100% that direction. Then I'll tell you another thing about myself. I remember, when we were in Mesivta, in Ocean Parkway, so Reb Yoel used to be the guest faherer. He would come and faher on the Likutei Torah or the Derech Mitzvah, or whatever we were learning in Mesivta, even when we were learning by the Reb Better Lipsker in Zal. So usually when you have a faher in Gemara, You're anxious before the fair. You're worried about the fair. Will you do good in the fair? You're nervous. But when Reb Yoel used to come to fair, we were actually excited. We were excited. We wanted him to come. And we wanted to get tested by him. Why? Because when he used to give a fair, it was a naya Klarkite in the Bible. Whatever Bible we were learning, he would ask a question or questions. Of course, he stumped us all. And then he would give the beer and the hezber. And it was so geschmack. So actually, whenever he gave a faher, we were looking forward to his fahers. Because of the reichkeit, of the Klarkite, of the biurim that he gave. Now, this is about ושננתם, the Klarkite. Now I want to talk about the Abgegebenkeit, the hard work. And that's why it's Ovi, Ovi. My brother, on the Zoom Farbrengen that they made about Reb Yoel, he said that there was a tkufa that every Thursday night they would go to Reb Yoel's house. He would invite them over, and they, the Bacharim, would prepare a question to ask Reb Yoel, a question in Chassidus. So that would be like the subject matter, like, let's say, for example, you have these classic questions. Was is Hecher? Neshamas Yisrael Tzitayra. Or was is Hecher? He didn't say this, my brother. I'm just saying. Balei Tshuva Tzadikim. You know, you have these questions that are broad questions, general questions, that, it'll be a long discussion. So they would have these questions. Usually they'd prepare a good question. They'd come to his house Thursday night, and they would have the question. They would discuss this question like for an hour and a half to 2 hours, let's say, by the table. And then they went like to the couch, to the sofa. And denochem they get darum from Chassidus. Chassidus Tziyurim, the history of Chassidus, things like that. And my brother says they spent the entire night till daybreak. And this was every Thursday night. That's story number one. Story number two, I want to say about, I don't know who remembers the Friday night shiurim in Chayvei Torah in the winter. I hear in the last couple of years that the whole Seder changed. But when I was a Bacher in the winter, could be Lich Benshin, let's take a guess, in America, I don't know, 4:22 p.m. Ma'ariv was 8 p.m. in 770 upstairs in the Kleine Zaal. Reb Yoel gave a shir, Chayvei Torah, said in the Gunin Maimer. But he gave a shir in one of the shir rooms in Chayvei Torah. So this was the tzir. The heater was blasting, you know those heaters, radiators in New York. The heater's blasting, it's freezing outside. And Reb Yoel would take one of those sichas from Chelik Hey Vav Zayin Ches Tes, the Chassidus sichas, the long ones. And he would go all out. Meanwhile, there were 60 Bachram there, and we must confess that most of them tried to stay up, but then they fell asleep. Because they were up a whole night, Thursday night. Mizista Donnerstag by Nacht, Melen Chassidus, like it says Nayim Yayim. So Bachram are up Leil Shishi. And then they went on Mivtzoyim the whole day. So the Poshet actually knocked out, physically knocked out. And here's Reb Yoel going strong on these sichas. And there's, let's say, 10 people listening and getting it and kochen sich in it, etc. But now I'm talking to myself. I'm a teacher. And I teach Chassidus, Baruch Hashem. It's a big schus. And I'm thinking to myself of both of these things. First, the first thing I just said, am I ready to sit Thursday nights with Bachrim a whole night? With 4 or 5 Bachrim and gizach up mit sie? Und gießen und gießen und gießen und geben und geben und geben. Onagbolus. And the same thing is with the Friday night winter sichashir that Reb Yoel used to give. You know, it hurts if one person is sleeping in a shir. More than one. And it was a big shir, but like I said, as I described it before. And still Reb Yoel gießt und gießt und gießt. And he's going in depth. And it's like, I don't know what to tell you. It's a 2.5 hour shir. straight. I give a shiur for 45 minutes, I'm getting tired. And he's giving a shiur for 2 hours. And it was unbelievable. And the Rebbe once spoke by a Farbrengen, and this is the point. Like Boimer Tovshem Menvav, the Rebbe spoke about Mashpia, and he said, as Mashpia as Miloshen Shefa. And the Rebbe went into the difference between Oyer and Shefa, as explained in Chassidus, that by Oyer, it doesn't make a difference to the Moyer, whether the Oyer is Niskabel, where is Niskabel, how is Niskabel, Koydem Ashba, Lachar Ashba, all makes no difference. But when it comes to Shefa, there's a difference. Koydem Ashba, B'shas Ashba, Lachar Ashba. And then the Rebbe hat sich ausgedrückt. Bei der Emes Mashpia darf es kosten gesund. And that was the point that the Rebbe was saying. That by a Mashpia es darf kosten. That's what it means. He invests himself. The pnimis, his blood, sweat, and tears, so to speak, are invested in the teaching. And this you saw by Reb Yoel, as I explained last week, and this week also, the same idea. Het mamish gelebt im Minyan, and he was totally involved, sich abgegeben und zugetragen to the Talmud totally, and the hours, as we discussed today. So the Eibusher should help that we should all learn from this. Every one of us is in a leadership position, whether you're a father, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a Chabad house rabbi, whether you're a mashpia, whoever you are, you're a counselor, you're a head counselor. Every one of us is in a leadership guidance position for some people. So we have to remember this Meiredik and Nekuda of the Sikha of the Rebbe. Ovi applies to every single one of us. We have to look at the one we're influencing in as our child, and then he will look at you as his father. But you have to remember that you have to be Rechav Yisrael. You have to give him the principles, the keys to make it through life totally. And not only Rechav Yisrael, but if need be, your Ufroshav. You might have to get into the driver's seat. You might have to be hanging on for much longer and get into many, many more details. And the Rebbe shall help in that if we will do this properly and learn the lesson properly, then we will have much more hatzlacha in all our pu'ulis of afotzas hamayones chutza, and through our avoidin afotzas hamayones chutza, that will bring the ka'osi mar do malka mashicha, especially in Shabbos nachamu, double nechama, begula mitzvah shleima, take it from a yad mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarich, your man in Melbourne.